What's up, everyone? George and Max here from the Unqualified Filmbros podcast. We are here on day 8 of the Rewatch with where we're watching every single MCU film, every single project leading up to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Today we are talking about Thor: The Dark World. Tomorrow is going to be Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Getting really excited. I'm so sorry. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into the rewatch. George, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this film is not good. Back to you, Max.
Yeah, George, this film is not good.
End of episode?
End of episode.
Yeah, I think my biggest qualm with Thor: The Dark World is that it just doesn't take the characters anywhere new. I think you know that Thor's going to be a little bit reckless. He's going to do what he can to help, the people that he cares about, Jane and Selvig and Darcy, and, also, all the Asgardians. Odin's not going to approve of what he wants to do. Loki's going to be a trickster. Frigga's going to be the wisest one, obviously. There's going to be some generic CGI villain. I say this in almost every Letterboxd review I read of this film, and I've seen it now probably 4 or 5 times, just because I watch the MCU like every year. It's just that you can't take the characters and put them somewhere new, like in London instead of New Mexico, or in the Dark World, and expect them to go anywhere new emotionally or story-wise, take them anywhere new. So I think that this one hits a lot of the same story beats as the first film, but that doesn't mean that it recaptures some of the strengths of that first film.
No, it doesn't. And I don't think even if it did, I still wouldn't give this film very high marks, because at this point, we have seen Thor in 2 films, his solo outing and the Avengers. And you'd think that there'd be some kind of differentiation between the 2 performances and appearances. And yet, George, you're absolutely right. They just give us nothing.
It's not that they give us nothing, it's that they give us nothing
more,
new.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's a little bit more mature.
Just a hair.
It's kind of like we're leaving off right at the end of Thor and not really getting anything from his interactions in the Avengers.
The way that we got reaction to the Avengers from Tony Stark in Iron Man 3.
Yes.
It's almost as if that movie didn't happen, other than Jane slapping Thor and saying, "You were in New York," and slapping Loki and being like, "That was for New York."
That was for New York.
You're just, it's more of a mention than something that impacts the story at all.
Yeah, and maybe it's because he's a god and time is different for him, but I don't care. I mean, I'm watching a movie to sort of get some of that reaction. I mean, it's a pretty huge event, regardless of how long you've been alive, to deal with an alien invasion and go to a new planet, go to like work in a team, which is something he doesn't
team up with other
do.
super people.
Yeah, he has people around him, or he has Asgardians around him, but they're not superheroes in the way that he teamed up with the Avengers.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there's trying to think of some let me talk about Tom Hiddleston's performance, because he's great as always.
One of the bright spots of this film, the few bright spots.
Yeah, I'm thinking of when he finds out that Frigga has died, and he puts on a cold snarl and essentially refuses to talk to Thor. And as soon as Thor walks away, he breaks, and then it sort of devolves into this depression, and his prison cell in Asgard becomes filthy, and you can feel the weight and the heaviness of the death of his favorite person, his favorite relationship. You can feel that in Tom Hiddleston's performance.
Yeah, I think every time I watch this film, I hone in on Hiddleston as Loki. It's just that he is so in tune with that character
Mm-hmm.
after, this is like Chris Hemsworth's third film as Thor. It's also Hiddleston's third film as Loki.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we do see some growth from the Avengers, the film The Avengers. We see how Loki has evolved. And, we're not seeing that redemptive arc as much as we will in Thor Ragnarok or the beginning of Avengers Infinity War. But we're seeing Loki become a little bit more complex than he was in the first Thor film and in the first Avengers film. So I think you're smart to bring him up, and we're smart to give him this much airtime, because Tom Hiddleston is so nuanced. He's so there's almost no word to describe what he brings to this role. Even in a film that isn't that good, he's still giving that A-level performance.
Yeah, I think part of that is due to the fact that I mean, yeah, you said it, we get that complexity, but I mean, it's in such small ways. It's not
It's
like
subtle.
yeah, and it's not like he's a huge part of the film either. He's not dominating every scene. He's not even in every scene. But it's the way that he takes over the screen when he is in the scene. Even in that scene when he's being taken out of the Asgardian prison by Thor and he's shapeshifting into various Avengers characters and other characters that Thor knows to mess with him. That's the trickster side. And then on the flip side, you see him working with Thor to trick the Dark Elves in the Dark World. And so you get to see them actually work together and be on the same side, which is a nice little segue into what we see in later performances in later movies. So he doesn't lose that originality of being a little bit mischievous, but there's more to him than just that. And we get a lot more of that in this film than we have ever before.
It's funny, he could trick Malekith, but he couldn't trick Thanos. Obviously. Yeah, I mean, that sequence when he's shape-shifting, he becomes Steve Rogers and Thor becomes Sif, and they're just riffing on each other. It is a great example of Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston having that level of familiarity with each other, knowing what they can get out of each other in the roles and as co-stars, but also as brothers, because they are so far into these characters by now that we see the relationship and the chemistry of these two guys come through in their performances more or less from that scene on. Beforehand it was very much Hemsworth is being, oh, I'm Thor, I'm stoic, I will kill you if you betray me. And everyone else says, if you betray him, I'll kill you. Apparently there'll be a line. But you've got these guys forming an even deeper bond. And I think the battle on the Dark World and Loki faking his death again really, really show what these two characters can be and what these two actors can bring to the roles. It's just a shame that they can't get to, obviously the relationship needs to build before we get to Thor Ragnarok, but they can't show the development that we see in the Dark World in a better movie.
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, one thing before we go to rankings and ratings that I think will sort of this has been sort of fed into by that point was the death of Freya and her funeral. That,
Gorgeous.
yeah, and up until this point in the MCU, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, the most significant death. Um, for the most part. I mean,
Unless you want to count Steve Rogers at the end of the first Avenger.
sure, but
Phil Coulson.
Yeah, I think so, but I don't think, at least for me,
Say your
Coulson's
piece.
death didn't have as much of like an emotional impact because I think I knew what it meant to both of them, and that is sort of a unifying event in both of their lives, that they both loved their mother. Loki obviously was closer to Frigga than Thor was, but they both loved her immensely. And the funeral was gorgeous, and I think that it's a start of their sort of joint trauma. They're both trauma centric characters, and they make decisions based off of things that happen in their lives, and lots of things that happen in their lives have been traumatic. So I think that's important to note as we go forward in the MCU.
Yeah. I think as we wrap up here, I just want to give one quick shout out to Brian Tyler. The main Thor: The Dark World suite from the last couple of minutes of the film, and then into the opening of the credits, the end credits, not the opening credits. Phrase that poorly, but I think that the score of this film, while it's not by any stretch of the imagination a top 5 MCU film, top 5 MCU score, I'll throw that out there. And props to this film for including the one Infinity Stone needed to make it important. You got to get the Reality Stone in there somewhere.
It was well played. I'll give him that.
Got to make it important for Avengers Endgame.
Exactly.
And that sequence in Endgame did elevate this film a little bit for me. It made it feel a little bit more important. And there are other films in the MCU that are good films, but aren't that important in the MCU. This is really important in the MCU. Not a great film.
Yeah, and there's more of those kinds of projects and films that we'll talk about in subsequent episodes of the Rewatch. As we close this one out, George, why don't you hit us with your ranking and your rating?
Yeah, so some of these projects have to be towards the bottom. This one's about as close to the bottom as you can get at this point. 31 out of 32 for the MCU projects. And that's just it's both a commentary on this film not really bringing anything new to the characters, less so the world, because as we just said, it does add to the MCU. You get the Reality Stone, you get Loki faking his death again, you get the death of Frigga, and that's emotional impact on Thor and Loki and Odin. But yeah, 31 out of 32, just because there are a lot of other MCU projects that are way better than this one. And as for a 0 to 100 score, it's got some good filmmaking elements. Visuals are really good. The score is really good. Storytelling wise, it's basically the same as the first film. Thor helps Jane. Loki tricks. 42 out of 100.
Yeah, so that's a low score. And I will also have low scores both for ranking and rating. For my ranking, it is 30 out of 32. Got to be near the bottom. It's not a great project in my book. And my rating will reflect that. It's 56 out of 100. It's very low for all the reasons we laid out before. Anyways, it's going to do it for us tonight. Tomorrow we will come back and hang out with you guys and talk about Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So I know we're both excited about that.
Love that one.
Yeah, we both loved it. We're gonna have lots of thoughts, lots of stuff to talk about. So come hang out. See ya.
See you tomorrow.